think we're ready to go. Without further ado, our speaker today is concluded with Compassion and Choices. Compassion and Choices' mission is to empower people to control your end-of-life journey in alignment with your values. Kim's a great speaker. She's been here for a long time. I first met Kim when she was speaking to a group, an association that I belong to, the Patient Planning Association. Kim's goal is to begin to foster a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive movement, launching the first strong initiative and authorizing and implementing medical aided dying in 6 new jurisdictions. So again, ask your questions away. Kim is a national expert. She speaks all over the country about this. It's a real treat to introduce my remote friend, Kim Callinan. Kim, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much. What a pleasure to be here, Carl, and also want to recognize and acknowledge Becky Skinner for her work around this, and really call out A&I Wealth Management for their recognition of the importance of end-of-life planning and healthcare planning at the end of life, and the relationship between healthcare planning and financial planning. So, of course, there's a direct relationship. You've got to be able to pay for services and those things. But what I have seen in my work is that often at the very end of one's life, the financial planner is often the person that is left with one of the closest relationships to that client. And being sure that their clients are making sure to take steps to be clear about what their values and priorities are is really important. So thank you to Frank and Becky and A&I Wealth Management for having me here today. The song you just listened to, I hope puts you in the mood to recognize that we can talk about the end of life and do so with joy and humor and fun. It's the one inevitability that takes place in our life. You know, you're going to pay taxes. You know that we're all going to die at some point. And what I've really seen in my work is that those people that are able to recognize the finiteness of life end up living a far more meaningful and impactful end. And so my hope today is that we're able to use this as an opportunity to make the life that you lead more meaningful and impactful by being a little bit closer to your mortality. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and put the presentation up on the screen. And let's see. Now it's tricking me how I do this. Share screen. Okay. So, you already enjoyed the song. So, what we're going to talk about is how to finish strong and face illness with confidence and control. When you think about life is meaningful because it's a story, and in stories, ending matters. And that is a famous quote by Dr. Atul Gawande, who wrote the book Being Mortal, which is a phenomenal book for anyone who's interested in learning a little bit more about the topic. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the organization I lead, just to give you a sense of who we are. The current state of end-of-life care in the United States. I think often people think that dying is easy, and actually it's quite difficult to do it and do it well. How to be the author of the final chapter of your life. And then if you're interested in getting involved, and I'll try to be sure I leave some time for Q&A. So just a little bit about Compassion and Choices. Our mission is simply to improve care, expand options, and empower everyone to chart their own end-of-life journey. And I like to use the examples of how I came to Compassion and Choices as a way to demonstrate our mission. When my grandmother was at the end of her life, she had an advance directive, and everything was fully documented. She did not want artificial means to extend her life. She was very clear that she had lived a good life, and that should she end up with her heart stopping, she did not want to be resuscitated back to life. She was old and frail, and her time had come. Unfortunately, she ended up in the emergency room. They resuscitated her back to life. She got hooked up to machines, and she was angry. You could see the look in her eyes of feeling violated. And it was pretty hard on us. She was never going to return to her old self, and she pulled all of the tubes out of her, and she ended up dying feeling as if we had not honored her final wishes. Fast forward, about 10 years later, my mom had become a hospice social worker. And now the time had come, and her father was at the very end of his life. And he too was very old. He was on hospice care. Made sure he got the best hospice care that was possible. And hospice care is um, support that you can have as you near the end of your life. If you are going to die within 6 months, that's a wraparound service. I think people mistakenly think of it as a place you go to die, but hospice care comes into your home, and they are treating all of your symptoms and making sure the very end of your life is as peaceful and humane as possible. And so my grandfather got the best hospice care possible in his area because my mom knew all of the ins and outs. And she also was a social worker, so she was very used to counseling other patients through the end of the life with their loved ones. But the experience was really different for her as the daughter of her father when he was dying. And she kept going into his room and encouraging him to eat just a little bit more. Come on, Dad, you're going to die if you don't eat just a little bit more. And the social worker pulled my mom aside, his social worker, and said, Connie, I know that you mean well, and I also know that as a hospice social worker, you know better. Your dad is nearing the end of his life. Every time you force him to eat, you're actually causing him a tremendous amount of pain. He's ready to go, and the only reason he's hanging on is for you. He wants to please you, and he doesn't want to disappoint you. But his body is shutting down, eating is difficult. Allow the natural dying process to take place. Give him permission to die. And so my mother was really torn up. She didn't know what to do. She called me up on the phone and she said to me, and this was long before I worked at Compassionate Choices, and she said to me, I don't know what to do. This is my father. How do I say goodbye to him? I don't want him to think that I don't want him around. What should I do? And I said, well, Mom, it seems like you could simply just ask him. He's the one who's dying. It's not you that's dying. Why don't you say to Grandpa, you know, what is it that you want right now? And she's like, oh, I guess I could do that. And so she went back to him and said, Dad, I love you. I want to support you. Tell me what it is that you want right now. And he said, I'm ready to die. My body is shutting down. It hurts when I eat. What I really want right now is to know that you're going to be okay. And I want, he basically wanted permission to die. And so my mom gave him permission. She called me up on the phone, me, my husband, and my 2 kids at the time. I still have the 2 kids, but they were little at the time. Went out to say goodbye to him. He got a chance to, he had something that was weighing on him about an interaction we had when I was younger. That was nothing in my mind, but in his mind he was really had a tremendous amount of guilt about it. He got to apologize to me for that. He got a chance to give final thoughts and ideas and wisdom to each one of us. And his final words were to my daughter, who was 3 at the time. And he said to her, I left candy on the table. Savor that the way you savor life. And as he was ready to die, my mom was on one side, I was on the other side. We each held his hand. And it was one of the most profound experiences I've had in my life, because there was a feeling of completeness and closure that came only because we were accepting the inevitability of death. And it was so profoundly different than the experience that we had with my grandmother, where we didn't honor her wishes, we didn't support her in the same way, and you could feel that disconnect, and the reality that we never really had the chance to say goodbye. So that's the work of Compassion and Choices, and the work that I have devoted myself to. And it's really about figuring out, how do you identify what's important to you at the end of life and give permission to the people around you, help them to support you through that process, or do the same for your loved ones. Right. We are a people-powered organization. We have over 500,000 supporters, more than 7,000 volunteers across the country, 85,000 active donors. We are entirely funded by individual support, and about 500,000 online actions take place each year, because we work both to change policies, to change within healthcare systems, to change laws, and then to empower individual people to get the kind of end they want. We really are trying to replicate the kind of success that took place within the childbirth movement. So if you look back to when I was born, the kind of childbirth experience that my mother had with me was dramatically different than the one I had with my son 30 years later. So when my mom had me, she was rushed to the emergency room. She was strapped down to the bed. She was knocked out and given twilight, so she kind of had very little memories around her. And I was born shortly thereafter. It was a very medicalized experience. My father was out in the waiting room. He had no kind of connection or relationship until after the birth took place. And that was a pretty typical childbirth experience 50 some odd years ago. You fast forward to now 3 years ago when I had my son, which was 30 years after my mother had me, and it was a dramatically different childbirth experience. By then, women had come forward and demanded a much more patient-directed childbirth experience, including myself, who fired my first OBGYN because she would not agree to support me through natural childbirth. But I wanted a hospital birth because I wasn't quite, daring enough to do it on my own, but I wanted a much more natural experience. I didn't want it to be medicalized. I wanted natural childbirth. I wanted my husband in the room. I wanted photos around me. I mean, I wanted a doula there as well. And I had the exact kind of a 10-page birth plan, and I had the exact kind of childbirth experience I wanted. And there was actually a moment where my heart rate was dropping and my son's heart rate was dropping. And they had wheeled the crash cart in to bring me into the operating room, and we're going to do a vacuum extraction. And the nurse midwife that was there said, "Let me try one more thing." And the OBGYN said, "You have 30 seconds. And so she reached inside of me, took the umbilical cord from around his neck, and he dropped right out after that. So he had an umbilical cord, which was what was making the childbirth go so challenging. And that happened because my values of wanting a natural childbirth were dictating the process. Now, my value was also I didn't want any harm done to him or I. And so had I needed that medicalized experience, it would have happened. But that's the kind of change that we want to see take place within end of life, so that the doctor's medical experience is guiding the kind of options that are available to somebody, but it's the person's individual values that are dictating which option somebody takes advantage of. If you look at the current state of end-of-life care, most people prefer to die like this. They want to die at home, wherever their home might be at the time, surrounded by their loved ones. But our end-of-life care experience has become incredibly medicalized, where you have at least a third of people dying in the hospitals. And this one doesn't show the full gamut, but oftentimes it's with all kinds of tubes hooked up to you. And it's really kind of beyond what feels like a really peaceful death. People die alone in a hospital in a manner inconsistent with their values. 3 in 4 patients with advanced cancer get treatments the professional society recognizes as harmful. So I think oftentimes we treat the end of life as if it's an either or. Either you're fighting for the end or you're giving up. And there's not a recognition of the gray that takes place in the middle, or of how medicalized we've become. And so, in fact, sometimes because there is a lack of comfort in embracing the inevitability of death, that actually treatments that are harmful to us are taking place because we're not asking the question, am I dying? And that's what we have seen, is that when patients are empowered to have conversations and to make choices, you often get more honest information that results in both better care, better quality of life, and often lower costs. 3 in 4 patients with a documented preference for comfort care get at least one aggressive intervention. And those aggressive interventions can be as much as, chest compressions, which, on TV, it looks like it's not a big deal, but it actually breaks your ribs often. It can be extremely painful. And that is an appropriate thing to do for somebody who is young and healthy and may otherwise have a long life in front of them. But for somebody who is frail at the end of their life, maybe has advanced cancer or something wrong with them, it can be extremely tragic and really debilitating for the person, and it doesn't change the outcome. The person is still going to die. So the question is, what is the aggressive intervention for? Is it for the loved ones, knowing that everything has been tried? Why are we putting somebody through that, and in essence torturing them if it's not medically beneficial? This was a study that came out a couple of years ago that, for me, really helped to explain the disconnect we have at the end of life. The study was done in the Critical Care Medicine Journal, and it found that doctors and patients define the word treatable drastically different. So when you go to a doctor's office and the doctor reports back that you have a treatable disease, most patients view that as positive. They assume treatable means that the disease can be cured or at least contained. The assumption is that the treatment is not going to seriously diminish their quality of life. And what the study showed is that even if dire news about the overall prognosis was presented by the clinician following the word treatable, the patients discounted it and came away that there was good news because what was wrong with them was quote unquote treatable. However, in doctor terminology, as a clinician, treatable is used in place of the word incurable. It simply means that there is a treatment that can be applied to this. It does not mean that the treatment will succeed. It doesn't mean that the disease will go away. It doesn't mean that there aren't side effects from that treatment. It doesn't even mean that the treatment is likely to prolong their life. It simply means there's something else that we can try. And so as a patient, if someone uses the word treatable with you, it's really important that you stop and you ask questions. Can you say more about what you mean by treatable? What's the likelihood that this treatment is going to result in me living? And am I going to return to the quality of life I previously had? Will this treatment likely prolong my life? Could the treatment result in side effects that are harmful or debilitating? Because you really want to get at the underlying understanding of what the doctor means when they use the word treatable. There really are consequences for not planning for both the dying person and for their loved ones. And so what we're going to do right now is help you to be the author of the final chapter in your life. And really, you can do this through education, through planning, through clarity, and through advocacy. And when you do this, when you prepare for the moment when you can no longer speak for yourself, you want to be sure that it's done now. So hopefully you get off of this call, you're inspired, you see the benefits it has for you and your family, and you do it right away. But then you also want to be sure that you update it multiple times. We usually talk about updating it if a new disease comes on, if you get divorced, if in any of the major milestones in your life of change, that's when you want to update it. If you move, those are all key times to make sure that you're updating your planning materials. What we have seen with advanced care planning is that it can reduce hospitalizations, it can increase your use of community-based palliative care and hospice, and it can positively impact the quality of your end of life. So just for some definition terms, palliative care is something that is offered to a person at it's medical care that is offered to a person at the onset of a serious diagnosis. You do not have to be dying in order to access palliative care. However, often, because it's a relatively new specialty, doctors won't automatically refer you. So if you have a chronic health condition where you have symptoms that are causing you pain and suffering and are difficult to manage and reducing the quality of your life, you would want to ask your doctor whether you might be a candidate for for palliative care. And community-based palliative care you can get within the community. Hospital-based palliative care, you would go to the hospital or it's done through the hospital. And now more often hospitals actually have community programs. But it is not tied to hospice care, and it's offered to anyone with any chronic or serious illness to help with the symptoms. It does not replace the treatment for your disease. It's a team of doctors, a nurse, a doctor, a social worker, clergy. This team works together in order to manage and mitigate your symptoms, and they work alongside the doctors that are curing your disease. Hospice care is only available to you at the onset of when you have a 6-month or less prognosis. So that means you're imminently going to die. It doesn't mean you will die within 6 months. Many people roll on and off of hospice care, but it means that the doctor believes that, you could die within 6 months. You have to be willing to forego curative treatments. So you have to be to the point where you're no longer want to try experimental treatments. However, often doctors refer patients to hospice care much later than really they're eligible for it. And this unfortunately leaves you without the wraparound service that you get from hospice care. You do get palliative care on hospice care, which and often it is more palliative care is available through hospice care because hospice care has a federal benefit and palliative care is insurance specific. So often you can get more through hospice care than you could through straight up palliative care. And it's available and it really provides services not just to the dying person, but also to their loved ones. You can get service if you need relief from your care. You can get grief service. There's a host of services that are available both to the dying person and to their supporter. And all of these things from advanced care planning can really improve the quality of your end-of-life care. For many people, going to the hospital at the end of their life is a place that they'd like to avoid, and palliative care also allows a person to be able to avoid unnecessary hospitalizations, giving you the ability to get the care you want in your own home instead of at a hospital. The other thing that I would say is that end-of-life planning is truly a gift. And I will use another example from my own life that I will say I see happen time and time again, and often not with the happy ending that mine had. And this was from long before I worked at Compassion and Choices. My father was going in for triple bypass surgery. And I lived in Maryland at the time, and my parents lived in Florida. And my mom called me up and said, come out, your dad's having immediate surgery. We don't know if he'll make it. And so I rushed and got there just before he went into the surgery. And as he was getting wheeled into the surgery, or a little bit before that, he pushed the papers in front of me for his healthcare proxy. And he said, here, sign this. And I said, what's this? And he said, it's the form for you to be my healthcare proxy. And I said, oh, okay, all right. And so he went away and he got wheeled into the emergency room or the operating room. And about halfway through his surgery, I turned to my mom and I said, why does Dad want me to be his healthcare proxy? And my mom said, oh, he knew I couldn't make the difficult decisions. And I said, the difficult decisions? Like, what difficult decisions? She's like, like when to pull the plug. And I was like, pull the plug? Like, what do you mean? And she goes, like when the person's ready to die and you pull the plug on them. I was like, I don't know anything about pulling plugs. Like, what are you talking about? And she's like, well, the difficult. And I said, why does Dad think I could make the difficult decisions? And she's like, you're much better at that than I am. And I said, okay, but I don't know anything about this. And so I'm now in the operating room and I'm furiously Googling when to pull the plug, end of life decisions. And I'm reading material after material, and every single one of them starts with, it's critical that you have a conversation with your loved ones about what your values and priorities are so they can make decisions on your behalf. And now I'm hysterical because my father has had no such conversation with me, and he's given me this grave responsibility. And I'm asking my mom questions. Well, it says I'm supposed to know what Dad thinks about in terms of quality of life. What is Dad? And she goes, oh, he doesn't want extra stuff. I was like, what does that mean, Mom? She could answer nothing except that I was confident that I could make decisions. And I was increasingly angry at my father. He was the kind of man who planned for everything. He literally saved from the moment I was born for my college education. He saved for my wedding. So he's one of the few people in the world that actually had a bank account just for my wedding, knowing that he was going to pay for his daughter's wedding. He saved for my college education. When my kids were born, he saved for their college education. Like, my father had his will figured out, everything that you could imagine. Like, he is the consummate planner. He was a businessman. And the thing that he said to me day in, day out when I was growing up is, I will never put you in a position that I have not prepared you for, but I will never do something that for you that you're capable of doing. And that was his mantra my whole life. And here I was, and he's in the operating room, and he had very clearly given me a responsibility that I was not prepared for. And I was angry at him. So the surgery went on for 2 hours longer than it was supposed to. I am hysterically crying by the time we get to the end of the surgery. And then when they announce that he is out, I run into his room and I yell at him. I am just furious with him that he put me in this position. He pulled the tubes out of his mouth and he said, "I'm not dead yet." And it ended up now, because he lived through that and is still alive to this day, many, many, many years later. We're probably on decades later. We've had many conversations now about his end of life wishes. But that was the moment that I realized that end of life planning is not just a gift for the dying person, but it's a gift for those that are left behind. Because I see now in my job time and time again how hard it is for a family member to make decisions on behalf of their loved ones if they don't have the clarity that comes with strong end of life planning. So here's what you should do and can do in order to be the author of your end of life, and also to be sure that if you are somebody else's healthcare proxy, that you're helping to be sure that they're being the author of their end of life. The first is you want to know your rights. There are certain rights that every single person has at the federal level that are guaranteed rights. The first is the right to informed consent regarding medical treatments and medications. And you know, when you go into the emergency room and you have any kind of procedure done, we're all signing a gazillion different forms saying that we understand the consequences of those treatment options. But the reality is very few, myself included, really do take the time to fully understand the implications. And those are when you want to really ask questions. You want to understand, what is the likelihood that I'm going to come out of this surgery? What percentage of people have this surgery and, come out, living a relatively normal life? What are the kinds of side effects that could take place? Those understanding the percentages and the odds that you're playing could impact the kind of treatment decisions that you make. And we see that there are many, many, many incredible treatments that are both life prolonging and improve the quality of life within medicine. But there are still a set of experimental treatments that really do leave quite a bit of negative impact on people who use them. And the question is whether or not you want that kind of an impact, or whether or not you want quality of life. And so it's not an either or. It's not I'm fighting till the end or I'm giving up, because the fight to the end, that extra treatment, could in fact shorten your life and impact your quality of life. One example of this is a woman that I met with. It was the daughter of a woman who died, who got a form of cancer treatment that she did not understand was really experimental and the impact it could have, and it made her radioactive. And so she was not allowed after the treatment for a period of time to be around anybody. She had a new granddaughter that was on her way, and she never got to hug her granddaughter or welcome her into the family, because she found out after the fact that the treatment made her radioactive and she couldn't be near the family. And that's an example of how not understanding the impact of your treatment options could impact your quality of life and the kind of decisions you made. She died shortly after that, never getting to hold her granddaughter. And that for her would have been the choice that she had chosen if she understood the odds that she was playing and the impact that treatment had on her overall quality of life. You also have the right to refuse treatments or medications. So I think we get into this default mode with medicine. We have an incredible healthcare system. There are so many available treatments. We are living far longer than we ever did before, and we want to take advantage of every one of those. But there does become a point for many people where the treatments are causing more harm and are more consequential than choosing palliative care and care that keeps us comfortable. And so just know that if you've had 14 chemotherapy treatments and those chemotherapy treatments are not working and they're making it so that you no longer enjoy life, you do have the option of refusing treatments. You also have the right for as much pain medication as you need to keep you comfortable if you are within that 6-month prognosis. And this is really an important right because with the rise in the opioid epidemic, providers are very nervous about prescribing too much pain medication. And so they will be very conservative. But when the lawsuit went forward around the opioids and prescription, we actually were able to carve out end of life and make sure that people continue to have the right for enough pain medication to alleviate their sufferings. Now, we do see instances where there is no amount of pain medication that's going to alleviate the suffering, but you have the right to ask and to advocate for that for sure. You also want to understand the full range of end-of-life options that are available to you. I've already talked about palliative care, which comes at the onset of any serious diagnosis. You do not have to be terminally ill, but it is insurance specific. You have the option of hospice care, which comes with a 6-month prognosis. But again, doctors are very reticent to give that prognosis. And so you often need to ask the doctor, am I eligible for hospice care if you're really at the end and you're not feeling great? You have the option to stop or refuse treatments. And these are just some examples. Active medical treatment for other diseases. So my father has indicated to me that should he ever get dementia, that he would like to stop taking his heart medication and his diabetes medication, but have pain medication be given to him to allow him to accelerate the dying process. He does not want to end up living a prolonged life where we're using medicine to artificially extend his life if he has dementia. Pacemakers can come out or be turned off, antibiotics, resuscitation, chest compression, intubation. These are all things that you can refuse. Pneumonia is often known as the old man's friend because you can actually die very peacefully from untreated pneumonia, especially if you have pain and symptom management along with it, which you can get from hospice or palliative care. You can refuse mechanical ventilation, intubation, feeding tubes, and IV hydration. IV hydration is another one. You are putting food and liquid into a person, which is, the body is often shutting down as a natural part of the dying process. And we have become so focused on prolonging life that about a quarter of people end up with a feeding tube. Now, if the feeding tube is providing you with short-term nutrition, and then there is a treatment that is going to result in you being able to live longer, that's a great option. But if you're at the very end of your life and you're dying and already suffering quite a bit, the vast majority of people, or you're in a state of advanced dementia, the vast majority of people in surveys would say, I don't want IV hydration. Yet that often happens because family members and loved ones are focused on extension of life rather than the acceptance of death. You also have the option, if you are mentally capable and you have some type of a serious health condition, to choose the option of voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, which you would want to do with the support of your healthcare team. Palliative sedation is available if it is medically indicated. Palliative sedation is when they give enough medication to the person so that they are in a coma. And then the person is no longer suffering and is able to die peacefully in their sleep. And then in 10 jurisdictions and Washington, D.C., the option of medical aid in dying is available. And that is when a terminally ill person who has a prognosis of 6 months or less to live is able to request from their doctor the ability to self-administer medication that allows them to end their pain and suffering at the moment of their choice. And that is available in 10 states and Washington, D.C. And we are currently working to authorize it in more places. Again, you want to plan for when you can't speak for yourself. And through advanced care planning, the selection of the filling out of an advance directive and the identification of your healthcare proxy. I think a lot of times people think, oh, I filled out my advance directive, now everything is taken care of. The reality is, as happened in the case of my grandmother, advance directives have limitations and are often not followed. They only apply to a small set of questions. You know, they tell you, do you want to be resuscitated? Do you want IV hydration? Do you want tubes? But they're not really answering a whole host of questions that a healthcare proxy is going to have to make leading up to the death, especially if you have a longer term chronic condition or you have dementia. So you want to be sure that you do your advance directive, but we have an end-of-life planning guide that's far more comprehensive, and I would encourage you to also do that, and it's available for free. There are also advance directives don't have a lot of teeth behind them. We're starting to see a bit more following of them, but if you have two family members that disagree, often the healthcare system will follow the person that wants the most care. So one of the things that's important with an advance directive is that you're bringing your care team together and making sure that anyone who might be there for you at the end of life is clear about what your values and priorities are. This is our end-of-life decision guide. It has on page 16 of it right now, it has a great planning checklist. I would encourage you to go ahead and use this to help guide you through your end-of-life planning. It has everything from how to fill out your advance directive to what are some supplemental advance directives you might want, like a dementia directive or a sectarian directive, residential agreements, hospital visitation forms. So there's a whole host of items in this. And if you have a serious or chronic illness and you live in a state that has PULSE, physician's orders for life-sustaining treatment, that is like a supercharged medical order that goes in addition to an advance directive that you work on with your doctor, and you would want to be sure you have that in place as well. One of the most important things that you can do is identify and educate your healthcare proxy. Now, it's interesting because the vast majority of people default to their partner as their healthcare proxy. And in many instances, that person is the right person to be your healthcare proxy. And I definitely don't want to cause a family feud if you decide that your partner is not the right healthcare proxy. But the interesting part of my dad is that while he had not properly prepared me for being his healthcare proxy, he was actually onto something when he suggested it should be me and not my mom. And what he recognized then was right, that my mom, when his end comes, is going to be so focused on, I can't live without him, that asking her to be the one to make the decision about what it is that he would want was going to be beyond what she would want to do and be able to do. And so his decision to choose me was the right decision. Now, where he went wrong was in not educating me about what his values and priorities are. So when you're thinking about who your healthcare proxy is, you want to think about somebody who, number one, is a strong advocate and will be willing to stand up for what is important to you for your values and priorities, and won't just go along with whatever the default recommendation is. That is going to be able to disrupt the default unless it is that you want all available care, because that will likely be the default. The second thing that is important is that you pick somebody who is either aligned with your values and priorities, and so therefore will be comfortable carrying out your values and priorities for you, or may have a different set of values and priorities, but is aligned around the reality that it is the patient's values and priorities that should dictate the kind of care a person gets, and that is comfortable executing on whatever your values are. And I think people often assume that there really is not much difference, that everybody is the same. But when you fill out, we have a dementia directive. It was really, really interesting for me to work with my family in filling out the dementia directive to see how varied people's values and priorities are when it comes to the end of life, and at what point what quality of life means to each individual person. You also want to be sure you educate the rest of your family and friends, because your family and friends who might be there will have the ability to influence things. And they also can cause a tremendous amount of suffering of difficulty and challenging for your healthcare proxy if they disagree. So you can do your family and your proxy a real service by bringing them together in advance, even when you're perfectly healthy, and letting them know what's important to you at the end of life. What I've seen is that families who do this are able to really come together during the dying process, and they leave that a much stronger family. And families who fail to do this often, not always, but often end up with some rift in the family where people felt like something different should have happened at the end of life, with one wanting all available treatment and the other feeling like treatment should be stopped, in a very different set of values that causes real suffering. You also want to find doctors who will honor your values and educate the doctors about what you want. Bring your advance directive. Bring, if you do any supplemental directives. You are eligible under Medicare to have an advanced care planning conversation with a physician once a year. And I would encourage you to call and schedule that specific consultation so that you have adequate time to make sure that your doctor is aligned with your values and priorities. And we do have a conversation, have a little checklist around how to find a doctor that is supportive of your wishes that we can share. And don't forget to plan for dementia. Over 10 million new cases of dementia every year worldwide, 1 in every 3 seconds. There are almost 7 million people in the United States that are living right now with Alzheimer's disease, even more if you think about dementia. And nearly 50% of older adults die with some form of dementia, either with or from dementia. So this is a disease that is really, really changing how people die. And if you think back 50 years ago, people didn't die from dementia. We died from disease, from dehydration, from diabetes, and a host of other things. But we have gotten so good in medicine, being able to extend the length of time people's bodies live, we haven't quite figured out how to keep up with the mind. And so our bodies are staying alive through artificial means, and our brains and our minds are shutting down. And for many people, we've done survey data around this. 8 out of 10 people say, I don't want to live with advanced dementia, for years. But oftentimes what happens, because we define in our society love as keeping somebody alive, somebody will end up in a nursing home living an extended period of time with advanced dementia, with quality of life inconsistent with their values, when in fact there are diseases that are being treated or that come on that would allow for a natural death to take place. But people don't think about that. They simply go along with the prevailing wisdom that love means keeping somebody alive as long as possible, even if you're using artificial means. People are often with dementia receiving expensive, non-beneficial interventions straight through to the final months of their life. There's a very powerful op-ed that was written by a Dr. Jeffrey Hosta that was in the Washington Post a couple of years ago that was titled, We're Torturing People with Dementia and It's Totally Unnecessary. I don't know Dr. Hosta, but he, I think, so eloquently talked about what is happening, which is that when you're at the very end of life with dementia, it is really traumatic for most people with dementia to leave their care setting. And he shared the story of a woman who was I think she was in her late 80s. She was in advanced dementia. She could no longer feed herself, dress herself, clothe herself, had no awareness of the people around her. And her family insisted that she go to the emergency room at the end of her life. And then they wanted all available treatments. And so she was resuscitated. She had chest compressions. She had, feeding tubes, all kinds of things. And she died several hours later. And his point was, this is a woman that we tortured at the end of her life, likely inconsistent with what she would have wanted if anybody had asked her. And it would be much more humane if she had remained at her nursing home and was allowed to gracefully and peacefully die there with the benefit of pain management. But we are not thinking about this. We're thinking about, oh, grandma's dying or oh, mom is dying, and that love means extending life. And so I would encourage you to think about whether, what love really means to you when it comes to the end of life, and what love means, understanding what love means for your family members, and then articulating that so that they're acting in a manner that's consistent with what you would want. 57% of adults with dementia had at least one emergency room visit in the last month of their life. And again, when you're in the last month of life with dementia, you have no recognition of your loved ones. You are, in bed. It is an existence that the vast majority of people would not want prolonged, but we're sending the majority to the emergency room instead of allowing them to peacefully die. 4 in 10 hospital stays for adults with dementia were entirely avoidable with other forms of treatment. And the treatments are not consistent with what most people say they want at the end of life. I do want to be really clear. I don't have a value that people shouldn't be getting these treatments. What I see is an inconsistency with what the vast majority of people say they want and the automatic default within our medical system that I want to be sure people are aware of, so that if you're among the group of people that wouldn't want this, you're taking the necessary steps to disrupt the default mode within medicine. 73% of people say they want to stop life-prolonging treatments if they're living with dementia. And standard advance directives do not address the complex and unique needs of people with dementia. It's not anywhere on an advance directive form. And that's why we have created a dementia values and priorities tool. It's available for free. You go to our website, you fill the tool out, you print it out, and you attach it to your advance directive. It gives you about 10 questions of common things that happen to a person who have dementia. And it allows you to select the level of care that you would want to receive should you have one of those things. Everything from, I want all of their available care, like continue to treat me and make sure that I stay alive, to I don't want, extensive, I don't want to be treated using, aggressive measures, but I do want to continue continue some treatments to look for every possible way to allow me to naturally die. So those are the options that are there. And you can choose with each of the symptoms which level of care you want, because the reality with dementia is it is a progressive disease. You can live for 3, 4, 5 years and have some level of quality of life that may be meaningful to you. The question is, what is meaningful to you? And you need to be the one to help decide that, because it puts family members in a really difficult place to decide, okay, if my loved one is singing and they're happy, but they don't recognize me, is that quality of life for them? Like, what's the point at which they would want me to start looking for natural escapes, like not treating pneumonia or taking them off their diabetes medication? You also want to be sure that you're able to navigate your care at the onset of a serious diagnosis, because the reality is that non-beneficial treatments start while you are still alert and capable of making decisions often. So the advance directive goes into play when you can no longer speak for yourself. However, often you're starting the non-beneficial treatments long before that. And what we have seen is that the evidence shows us that patients' questions can be absolutely transformative in terms of the kind of care you get. Simply asking the question of your doctor, am I dying? Or what's the impact? What are the side effects of this treatment will give you dramatically different care and different options than going along with whatever the recommendation is they give to you. And this is because you've got to recognize that doctors are extremely hesitant to tell somebody that they're dying. They went to medical school to save lives, and now all of a sudden they're at the end and someone's at the end of their life. And to be the person to say to them, there are no more options or things look really glim is extremely difficult. Only the best of doctors are really able to navigate those conversations effectively. And many are worried about the impact, saying that to a patient will have on them. And so if you want to get honest information, which hopefully you do, because the honest information allows you to make more informed decisions and allows families to come together around those decisions, ask your doctor questions because it'll serve as a catalyst for behavior change. We have a great tool on our website also free called the Diagnosis Decoder, and these have a bunch of questions you should ask your doctor depending on what kind of a visit you have. So this is a good tool that you can use for that. And this is our web address for all of these tools that I've been talking about can be found at www.compassionandchoices.org. They're all available for free. And I would hope that you would take advantage of them. We are a nonprofit. Our mission is just about empowering people to have an end of life that's consistent with their values, because we see the impact that this has, not just on the dying person, but on those that are left behind. So I hope you'll take advantage of these free resources. I also hope that some of you might be inspired to want to get involved in the movement. Maybe you've had your own experience with someone who's unnecessarily suffered at the end of life. And if it is, reach out to us on our website. There's a place that you can volunteer. We have a host of ways that people can get involved. Everything from being a volunteer to just taking online actions at your home. And of course, we always welcome financial contributions or bequests, because that is what keeps the organization able to do its work. These are some of our social media channels if you want to follow us. And with that, I will make sure you see the disclosure from ANI, and I will close things out and open it up for questions.
Kim, thank you so much. A round of applause. I mean, I don't think people are really pleased as well. Kim, that was truly enlightening. Hearing you, I don't know how many times I've heard you, but it's sinking home with me. And I think that there's some messages you just need to hear more than once. And this might be one of them. And I was thinking to myself as I'm sitting there, and we're all dealing with folks in our life who are on a stage or another, closer or further perhaps from their end. That might be a message that the person as we age needs to stay more than once. Am I right about that? Is that something that you can't just write it and forget it?
Yeah, absolutely. The people who are dying, who are having these conversations with their loved ones over and over again, it makes it so much easier for the family members to be able to carry out their wishes. And those people who are crystal clear on what it is that they want, like the family, I watch it happen over and over again. They come together and they have clarity and they feel like grief over the fact that they've lost a loved one, but there is a sense of community around the fact that they've honored this person. So yes, have the conversation in either direction. If you're the person, and the reality is none of us know when we're going to die. So I think often people think, oh yeah, I'll have that conversation later. But any one of us can be the person that, gets hit by the car tomorrow and ends up in this situation. And so you don't want to wait to have the conversation. You want to have the conversation today.
And sharing this message, the technology is great. We'll be able to share this video and on social media as well. So I'm going to just do a follow-up with that question before we'll see if we have anybody online. Talking about death can be scary and it can be depressing. Do you have any tips for us to open that conversation with our loved ones? And when they push back and say, oh, I don't want to hear it, how can we help this? How can we help make it happen anyway?
It is super hard. And I just want to acknowledge that it is hard and it is difficult if you haven't been brought up in a culture where from the beginning where death is just talked about. In my family, my daughter came at the time she was 18 years old, and she brought her advance directive and was all excited because today was the day she finally got to be an adult and fill out her advance directive. Now she grew up with a mom who was in this field. And so so for her, death is just a part of life. That was not how I was brought up. And I have had the experience with my parents where it's been really hard to talk with them about it. Even though my mom was a hospice social worker, you would have thought that made it easier, but it is really hard. So the way that I would encourage people to approach it is to give the person you're having a conversation with some ability to set the terms of the conversation, not whether or not they have the conversation, but give them some control over it and make sure they know that this is a form of love. So if you're the person who is older and you want them to be your healthcare proxy, or you want to review your wishes with them, you could say something to them like, hey, I don't have any plans of dying anytime soon, but it's really important to me that whenever my time comes, that you have everything that you need in order to be able to make decisions on my behalf, and that I leave you without the guilt and guesswork that comes when you often don't know. So I'd love to have this conversation with you. Can you let me know, do you want to have the conversation on Tuesday or Friday, or what would be a good time for you to have it? So you give them some control over it, but you don't say, you don't let them opt out. No, I don't want to have it, So I think that is the way I have approached it with my loved ones. And then you could also, if they push back, say to them, this really is a conversation. I know you don't understand why we have to have it now, but it is a conversation that one day you'll thank me that we've had. And so, could you just give me the benefit of the doubt with our relationship that this is an important conversation for us to have? The other possibility is, so what I have seen with this work, and I'm about to have I'm in part of an anthology called Plan a Life You Love. And I wrote a chapter that's about when you embrace the inevitability of death, that you lead a far more powerful life. So I'm actually trying to change the whole way we think about death. Like, if each and every day we were to realize that our time was finite, think about all the things in your life that you have hangups about that no longer would be a hangup. And I've had the benefit of working with these incredible terminally ill advocates who are dying, who just throw everything out. And they say things like, I don't think I felt like I was really living until I got my terminal diagnosis. And I just keep thinking to myself, well, gosh, I get the benefit of seeing how one lives their life when they really are clear that their time is short. I get that benefit. And now if I live my life that way each and every day, think about the impact that I can have and the kind of relationships that I can have. So I'm still playing around with how to talk about that, but you really do change your perspective on life when you're willing to embrace death.
I think you're talking about it great. Dialed it in right there. Great point of view. Questions from the audience or online?
Question?
Yep.
So you go to all this work, you put everything down, you find someone who shares your priorities and your values. And then it sounds like if one person shows up to support you who has a different opinion or who maybe doesn't share your, that could change the entirety of your plan. Obviously, you might try to talk to people ahead of time, but is there a way that you could be sure that your advocate's really the one speaking for you and not somebody else?
So the more steps you take, the less likely that is to happen. We have a litigation team, and those are the kinds of court cases that we would take on. Now, that's not the situation anyone wants to get themselves in. But if you have your healthcare proxy form filled out, and that person is your healthcare value, and they're asking for treatment, you can also put a note in there. If this isn't followed, or tell your healthcare proxy, call Compassion and Choices and, talk to their litigation team, because that's the kind of thing where we would do a stern letter to the hospital to enforce the advance directive. And we're doing more and more of trying to enforce the advance directive so that that voice that is the loudest doesn't become the default. but it could happen. But definitely have them reach out to us if that does happen, and we can try to intervene and make sure. And we were successful in a case in California in doing that.
Yeah, so many resources, so much great advice. Thank you so much. Any other questions from anybody? Yes. Yeah. One more. Yeah.
The part on your website that is for dementia. My mom is already 90 and has dementia, but is still pretty happy. How legal would it be for her to fill that out now when she says she's ready to go, but people would certainly question her ability, and clearly because she already has a fair bit of dementia now, or be too late.
So you would have to ask her doctor, and it depends. Somebody with dementia who is going in and out. So if she is lucid and she understands the decision that she's making at a point, then you could have her fill it out then and have someone sign it. The thing we try to encourage people to do is to videotape the person as well, because the videotape demonstrates their lucidity. And so as long as she's clear about her decisions and she understands the impact of her decisions, she's still considered to have, is she right now, have you taken over her care decisions, or is she still making her own medical decisions?
She probably doesn't have that part of coming in and out of, like, she's already pretty far gone. So my sister and I do that for her. She's lucid enough to say, like, I never thought I'd live this long. I'm ready to go home when it's time. So, but my sister and I are doing her, taking her to the doctor and making sure she takes her medicines and things like that.
So are you her healthcare proxy?
Yes.
And are you and your sister in alignment?
Yes.
Yeah. So you as her healthcare proxy could choose, you could choose not to treat certain things or not to give her aggressive treatments. So you may want to talk to your doctor about that. It's harder, but it just depends on the doctor on whether what they will do. But the healthcare proxy is given the authority to make decisions on behalf of a person, and every person has the right not to get treatments. So you could certainly talk to the doctor and see whether or not they would consider some of those as options.
Wow, great way to conclude. Thank you so much, Kim, for your time today. We really appreciate you. I look forward to seeing you in person again soon. And in behalf of all of our audience and everybody here, we wish that you would have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll talk to you guys later. Good luck with everything.
Bye-bye.